Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Zoom into Nature Hellbenders. This evening, we welcome Greg Lips for his program, The Rocky Road to Hellbender Recovery in Ohio. I'm Renee Baranka, the Director of Conservation Education and Outreach at Western Reserve Land Conservancy. At the Land Conservancy, I develop nature-based programming, both virtually and in person, for people of all ages, often utilizing the expansive network of conservation properties the Land Conservancy has protected in Northeast Ohio, which totals over 70,000 acres of natural landscapes, family farms, and urban green spaces. I've had the fortune of walking an Ohio River drainage stream with Greg and his spectacular field crew 2 summers ago. We spent a day surveying a property protected by the Land Conservancy along Little Beaver Creek. I quickly learned just how elusive these creatures can be, as we never saw a single hellbender all day. Fortunately, we did find quite a few neat fish that made up for the hiding hellbenders. During tonight's presentation, please place your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, not in the chat. It is my pleasure to introduce Greg Lips. Greg is the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Coordinator at The Ohio State University. His career has taken him to nearly every corner of the state, conducting surveys and working with partners to develop and implement strategies for the conservation and recovery of a wide range of species. Recent work has focused on Eastern Hellbenders, Eastern Massasaugas, Blanding's turtles, and spotted turtles. Greg was a contributing author and editor of both the Amphibians of Ohio and Reptiles of Ohio. He has held leadership roles in both the Midwest and Ohio chapters of Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, PARC for short. He was honored with PARC's Allison Haskell Award for Excellence in Herpetofauna Conservation in 2017, and he also received the Columbus Zoo's Commitment to Conservation Award in 2023. A lifelong resident of Ohio, Greg resides in the oak opening region of Southeast Fulton County. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Renee. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Yeah, you sound
Okay,
great.
great. So thank you so much, and it's great to be on today with everybody. And I'm really impressed by the group that you've pulled together here. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and turn off my video here. So
Sounds good.
let's see if I can get this all to work.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, good. And Renee, I'll leave it to you to tell me if anything's going wrong.
Just start the
Everything
slide.
looks,
You got to start the slideshow.
yep,
There you go. Perfect.
got it.
Looks great.
All right, all righty. I'm gonna
Yes.
turn my video off and we'll get started. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Eastern Hellbender and the recovery efforts underway in Ohio for this magnificent creature. I have an enormous amount of videos and photos of hellbenders, but nobody could compare to what Freshwater Illustrated has put together. And so I'm going to show you a snippet of their video to start off, because if this doesn't make you a lover of hellbenders, nothing will. And I think it's a really good introduction to the species. Well, I think I'm going to. Here we go.
It looks great, Greg.
That guy's home. Like have that rocket. Spend the whole year feeding and doing their own thing. And around the end of August or September, all of a sudden something triggers the males to do. They start fighting with each other. Females are drawn to the rocks that have been fighting with each other for millions of years. And now they're almost gone from the capital. It's safe to say that we've probably lost 80 or 90% of the population around. Those are subspecies of the hellbender that's in northern Arkansas and southern Missouri. Those have already been settled. It's kind of a scary thing when watching this decline. Really. One of the big issues with hellbenders is siltation. Getting thick films of mud. All that mud just builds up in these rivers over time and fills in all these little spaces. Hellbenders are one of the first to go, and it's a problem once they're gone, they're gone.
Okay, so Renee is going to drop the link to that full video. It's about 9 minutes long. It's totally worth watching. An amazing video shot by Freshwaters Illustrated, and I think a really good introduction to Hellbenders. Whenever I talk about Hellbenders, whenever I talk about amphibians or salamanders, I always think it's important to start with these, what I kind of think of as like the requisite important things to know. And one of those is if you're living in the Eastern United States, which I'm assuming most of the people watching tonight are, you live in a freshwater biodiversity hotspot globally. If you look at maps of freshwater fish diversity, freshwater turtle diversity, crayfish diversity, or mussel diversity, we have so much of it here. And even more so when we look at salamander species richness. I don't think a lot of people realize there's a large part of the globe where there are no salamanders. And in Eastern North America, you can go to a single county in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and find 28 species of salamanders in one county. We just have an incredible diversity. And, you know, what I like to paraphrase Spider-Man here and say, with great salamanders comes great salamander responsibilities. You know, if you care about conservation, you live in the Eastern United States, you need to care about salamanders. We are the ones that have the great richness that we need to protect. So let's talk about this family Cryptobranchidae. This is one of the oldest lineages of amphibians. It's a family of salamanders, and it includes the largest living salamanders, largest living amphibians in the world today. The biggest there on the left is the Chinese giant salamander. The center is the Japanese giant salamander, and then looking at ours now, suddenly our giant salamander looks pretty small. We have the smallest of them, the Hellbender, Cryptobranchus alleghaniensis. The name, by the way, means hidden gills, Cryptobranchus, hidden gills, alleghaniensis referring to the Allegheny River. A quick overview of the salamander's biology. Like I said, they're the largest of our living amphibians. They can reach over 2 foot in length. They are completely aquatic salamander, breathing almost entirely through the folds of skin along their body that are highly vascularized, so cutaneous respiration. They do have lungs, but do not really rely on them much for breathing. They eat just about anything. Most studies say crayfish are their number one thing in their diet, but crayfish also take a long time to digest. So when scientists flush the stomachs of hellbenders, they get a lot of crayfish parts. I think they eat anything that comes under a rock that they live under. And this is where they live, under the great big rocks found in streams. We know they can live a very long time, 35 years or more, and we know very little about the larvae. where the larvae live, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And they go through kind of a partial metamorphosis. So these are kind of the Peter Pans of the salamander world. They never quite grow up all the way. They go through a metamorphosis, but not like your typical salamander that goes from living in an aquatic situation and then transforming into a terrestrial adult. These guys never leave the water. Excuse me. So the distribution of the hellbender is found there on the left, and genetic studies, actually several genetic studies, have agreed that there are 8 management units, the largest of which is the Ohio Susquehanna. That's all of Ohio's hellbenders are in that clade. If you look over here to Missouri, these 3 watersheds down here in the southern part of Missouri and into Arkansas are a different subspecies. This is the Ozark Hellbender. The Ozark Hellbender has been federally listed for some time now. In the northern part of Missouri, this is a disjunct population of Eastern Hellbenders, and recently these were just given federal protection also, this disjunct. The Fish and Wildlife Service did not list the remainder of the Eastern Hellbender range, although that is being challenged in court right now. They are protected in every state in which they're found. Most states list them as endangered. Excuse me. So I got my start with Hellbenders in 2006. I had met Ralph Fingston, this Ralph right here, several years earlier, and I would not stop bothering him about Hellbenders. And Ralph had done the first survey of Hellbenders in the 80s throughout the state, and it was his work that led to them being listed as an endangered species in Ohio. And I kept asking Ralph, when are we going to go back and redo your survey? So in 2006, Ralph finally caved. And with funding from the Division of Wildlife, we spent the next 4 years running around the state, lifting these great big rocks. Somebody who wasn't too bright would swim underneath the big rock while it was being held. And if we were lucky, we'd pull up one of these big hellbenders. So we spent about 1,500 person hours in the water. We surveyed 24 waterways. This is just an overview of all the areas that we got to in that time. We had 89 observations of 79 individual hellbenders. We only found them in 11 of the 24 waterways we surveyed. But most importantly, when we compared our numbers, how many we were catching per person hour compared to what Ralph found in the 1980s, we saw that there was a huge decline in the numbers of animals we were catching, 82% in relative abundance. And I'll come back to talking about Western Ohio a little bit later on. And when we looked at what we were seeing with our hellbenders, not just this 82% decline, but we also saw this shift in demographics. So just in a couple of watersheds did we find what we would expect to be a normal, healthy population. So in this top graph you're looking at, these are young animals on this side, small animals, and these are really big animals on this side. You have kind of a nice little bell curve, right? This is kind of what you expect in most healthy populations. In all of the other watersheds where we found hellbenders, all we were finding is big old adults. I tell kids this would be like walking outside one day and finding out that the whole world had become a nursing home. There's no youngsters. So what's happening? Where are the babies? So I have to give a big shout out here to the Ohio Division of Wildlife, because when we finished this survey, instead of this just being another report that went on a shelf, John Navarro and others at the Division of Wildlife said, okay, what are we going to do about it? And so we wrote a conservation plan for the hellbender with 2 broad objectives. Objective 1, let's protect what we have and restore areas that need restoration. Let's really focus on the habitat. And then the second objective was, let's repatriate animals and augment these populations to boost them so that they don't blink out on us too soon. When I first brought this plan up, Ralph Fingston's reaction was, where are you going to get the babies to release? And I said, well, we're going to have to find nests. And in 2010, there had only been a single nest found in Ohio by Ralph in the mid 80s. So I had to figure out how to find eggs. So recovering hellbender populations, objective one, a lot of what Western Reserve Land Conservancy does, and they've been involved in a lot of our work in land acquisition, conservation easements, riparian plantings, and of course, this is all about partners. There's the land trust, the agencies, the soil and water conservation districts have done such an amazing job of protecting and restoring property. But now back to the second one. How are we going to do this? Well, I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people and spent a lot of time in the field trying to figure out how are we going to find hellbenders. One of the early ways that we used was a video borescope. And that video borescope allowed us to peer underneath these rocks and see if there were hellbenders in them. And what we learned pretty quickly was, as you saw in that video, there is this time where hellbenders kind of go crazy and you don't need to look very far back under the rocks. And so what we found was we could just snorkel with a mask and a dive light, and we could swim up on these males that were setting up these nests. And they were so aggressive and so interested in breeding, they would be right there at the entrance. And when I say aggressive, you'll notice in this picture, this is a hellbender skeleton. These males fight to the death sometimes and kill each other. When we capture hellbenders during this time, this swelling around the cloaca, this is the male getting ready for breeding. And in fact, sometimes they're even producing milt, like this animal here on the right. I'll also point out this animal here is missing his left limb. This animal here is missing his right limb. Here you can actually see some bone exposed. They're really brutal towards each other. And again, snorkeling around, you can find these animals in late August, early September, right at the edges of these big rocks, looking for a female to come in. And then I've been doing this long enough that every once in a while you just hit this amazing day. Most of the time it's been September 7th. Occasionally it's been as early as August 30th. Sometimes it's a couple of days after September 7th, but September 7th seems to be the date. And I'm going to show you this video here where there's a bunch of hellbenders just out walking around. So in the middle of the screen here, there's a hellbender. Here's another hellbender here. And I don't know that you'll be able to see the one over to the right, but there's another one over to the right here. Nope, can't see that one. But there's also a hellbender that has already found himself a good rock. He is right there underneath this piece of bedrock. And this is his nest, and he's been here for years. I think what's happening in a lot of these situations is these are satellite males. These are sneaker males that are hoping to intercept females that are coming to breed, and get in there and maybe fertilize some eggs. You'll see him here. There he is. So when we find a nest, when we find a male that is set up what we think is a nest, we'll come back after breeding season. So this will be in mid-September. And sometimes, again, these males will be so aggressive that we can actually get them to come out and attack us. This is I've got a stick that I'm using and just dancing around. And he actually came out and I was able to grab him out of there. And then this gives us the opportunity to collect eggs. So you're going to see here, this is just a little grappling hook I hooked into the eggs, and those are all the little hellbender embryos in there. And each nest will produce usually 250 to 300 eggs, unless multiple females have laid eggs in that nest. So there's the egg, and there's the little larvae. Make sure you get a good look at this larvae because you're going to see this again. When they hatch, they have this yellow yolk sac, and they just kind of lay on their side for a few days while they absorb that yolk sac. We take these animals to 3 different biosecure facilities that we have in the state where hellbenders are reared in isolation from any other animals because we don't want to have any potential infections that they could, or pathogens that they could then bring back to the wild. In 7 months, they look like this. In a year and 7 months, they've gone through that partial metamorphosis and absorbed the little gills that they had. And this is the stage that we really shoot for, is getting close to 3 years. These are the animals we want to release because we know that they're going to do a lot better than the little ones, have a lot better success. And one of the cool things is we have one of our biosecure facilities is actually at the Penta Career Center, which is a high school located close to me. And the students in the animal care program, a lot of these students will go on to become veterinarians and zookeepers and have jobs in the animal field. They come out with us and help us release the animals that they helped rear. And that's always a really special thing for most of these students. They've never snorkeled in a creek in Ohio or anywhere else for that matter. So that's always a lot of fun. And we've released a lot of Hellbenders. In fact, this slide's 1 year out of date. I don't have our 2023 numbers. We're approaching 1,900 individuals that have been released at 26 different sites and 10 different watersheds. So up until 2023, this would be the highlight slide for me, is when you run across one of the youngsters that you released, shining a light underneath a rock, and you have one of these little Hellbender babies peering back at you, knowing that this came from an egg that we collected and we reared, and now this animal's living his life. But 2023 really changed everything because we found one of our animals that we released with eggs. So this animal was collected as an egg in 2013. It was hatched at Toledo Zoo, transferred to the Columbus Zoo. We do transfer animals when we're dealing with space issues and who's got space and who can handle more animals. It was released in 2017, and here in 2023, we found this animal with a clutch of eggs, guarding eggs. You can see there that, from the time we released it, it went from weighing 85 grams to weighing 443 grams. It put on a bunch of weight, and it's so cool just to see an animal living its life and doing what Hellbenders do, even though it got its start in an aquarium. And I will say it's even more exciting than this is we found this animal. This was a huge celebration, but it ended up being only one of 3 that we found this year that were animals that we reared, released into the wild, that were with eggs this year. And you'll see I wrote in a hut. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So this is the hut I'm referring to. So in 2010, I was lucky enough to go to Japan with Mark Warner, who was then with the St. Louis Zoo, and Jeff Brigler, the Missouri State herpetologist. The 3 of us went and visited with Japanese giant salamander researchers. And one of the things we were really interested in were these Hanzaki huts. So this is Tochimoto. He has since passed away a couple of years ago. He's showing off one of what they call the Hanzaki huts. Hanzaki is the Japanese name for the Japanese giant salamander. And unlike our Hellbenders, they don't breed underneath rocks. They breed in burrows in the sides of the rivers. But Japan does a lot to the sides of their rivers, a lot of stream bank stabilization, and it destroys a lot of these burrows. So they have developed these Hanzaki huts, which are artificial breeding chambers for their Hellbenders. So when we came back from Japan, Jeff Brigler went to work building what he thought might be suitable artificial nesting sites for Eastern Hellbenders. And he deployed a bunch of these, and this is the winning design. So it mimics a burrow going underneath a big rock and then a cavity under that rock. He built these using chicken wire and concrete. I will tell you that I am not very good at building anything. So instead, after several failed attempts, I applied for a grant from the Columbus Zoo and was awarded it. And we went to work getting a precast built for building Hellbender huts. So our Hellbender huts are poured concrete. We use a low pH concrete. so it doesn't have to weather as much. We carry these out into the field, deploy them, and this is the first hellbender that we ever saw into a hut in 2016. Since that time, we've put out lots of huts, and we're seeing lots of hellbenders using them. In fact, I'm going to show you one more video here, and you'll get to see a hellbender inside of a hut. This has really been a game changer for us. We can really see what's going on inside these huts and what the male's doing. It's pretty amazing. There's very little water movement or no water movement inside of these huts. So it's the male's responsibility to fan the eggs to bring in enough oxygen and to eat any dead eggs. And he's doing all this in a pitch black. So he obviously is using chemosensory cues to do that and to protect these eggs. If the male was not there, these eggs would be consumed by fish and crayfish very, very quickly. But we've set cameras up outside the hut, and nothing's getting in there when the male hellbender is in there. He's pretty fierce. He's a really good dad. And of course, the other thing that this does is it gives us some great research opportunities. So this is a borescope that I'm sliding into a hellbender hut where we know there's eggs. And I'm going to fast forward here, and I'm going to show you the eggs. Remember I said those larvae with the bright yellow bellies? Well, that's what you're looking at here laying on the bottom. These are eggs that are hatching. This is October 28th. And these eggs are hatching in the wild. And at some point here, you're going to see, there you go. You see them wiggling around on the bottom, and you can still see some in the eggs that haven't hatched yet. And there's Dad. By the way, he bites this camera repeatedly when I slide it in there. Again, being a good dad, protecting his babies. You can see that wrinkly skin on him. And there's his eyeball.
Yeah, these videos are amazing, Greg.
Oh, good. I'm glad they're coming through good. Everybody loves their toes. I tell you, the first time somebody sees a hellbender in the wild, that's usually the first thing they remark on is, look at how cute their toes are. They do have these really, really interesting little toes. I'm adjusting the light on the borescope here to just try to get the right lighting. And you can see all those little yolk sacs laying on the bottom, hatching babies. So it takes a partnership to raise a hellbender. This is easily the longest running project that I've been a part of, and it's only because we have such an incredible partnership. The Ohio Hellbender Partnership meets twice a year. We rotate around the state. We have all of these agencies and zoos involved. We have local soil and water districts. We have the land trusts. It's really an amazing group of people that have made this happen and kept this going. And I'm really, really pleased about that. So the last thing I want to talk about is linking siltation and recruitment, or talking about why we're seeing this decline, what's going on. And probably the earliest hypothesis was really about siltation and recruitment. We see that hellbenders disappear when siltation levels go up. And as you saw in that video, it makes a lot of sense because silt can, mud and sediment entering the stream can just really seal up these rocks and cause them to lose places for them to hide, but maybe even more so for the larvae, which are hypothesized to go down into the gravel beds and spend the first years of their life down in there, which would explain why we never see or almost never see larvae in the wild, and would explain why we see adults hanging on in streams, but not any recruitment coming in. More recently, there's been a lot of work showing that forest cover around the stream is linked to recruitment and to the status of hellbenders. And this has been looked at in several different ways. The local riparian area. So if you look over here on the right, if you're surveying this area, is it this amount of force that matters? Or is it the catchment wide? Is it everything going up? Or is it the whole watershed? Is it all the catchment from that area? And the data indicates that it's this middle one, the catchment wide riparian area, that really matters. It is the most predictive for how hellbenders are doing. So I've been calling this the smoking gun paper that just came out in 2023. The title of the paper is Filial Cannibalism Leads to Chronic Nest Failure, Eastern Hellbender Salamanders. And what they found was, and again, this was all made possible because of huts. Hundreds of huts were put out in Virginia in different streams. And what they found was male hellbenders sometimes eat the eggs, and sometimes they eat all the eggs. But complete filial cannibalism, eating all of the eggs, is much, much more common, about 3 times more common when there's less forest cover in the upstream riparian catchment. So again, going back to this one, this right here, this middle one, when this goes down, when this forest cover goes down, you see a lot more of these males consuming all of the nests. And so this has really been the one that is probably our most, it's the best evidence we have to date of what's going on and why we're seeing this why we're seeing this lack of recruitment. So as far as an ecological or evolutionary reason for this, fish biologists have described this sort of behavior with fish. And the idea there is that if you're a long-lived animal, if you're going to live for several years and get several chances to reproduce, and you sense that things aren't good, it makes more sense to just eat the eggs, save all that energy, because it takes a lot of energy to guard all those eggs, and live to try again at another time. So you can see an evolutionary reason for doing it. But obviously, if there never is a better time and you just continue to eat your eggs, there's not going to be any youngsters coming up. So I took this data, and this map on the right here is doing the same thing that they did in the Hopkins et al. Paper, looking at each stream segment in Ohio that's large enough to have hellbenders, and only in the Ohio River drainage, because they do not occur in the Lake Erie drainage up here. So these are all the stream segments that are large enough to have hellbenders, and color coding them by the amount of riparian buffer on 50 meters on either side of the stream. And so what you can see here is a pretty easy explanation for why we don't see hellbenders in Western Ohio anymore. We do not have any stream segments with greater than 50% forest cover in the upstream catchment, the riparian forest cover. But we do still have that in some of our streams here in the eastern part of Ohio, where hellbenders are still hanging on. I really think this to me is extremely exciting, because it's really a blueprint for what we need to do. Where we need to increase our forest cover from 50 and 65% and get it up above 65%. And in those stream segments that are above 65%, let's make sure that we keep them that way. And this isn't to say there isn't other things that insult hellbenders. There's dams that are built. There's other ways that you can pollute creeks that don't include removing riparian corridors, but riparian corridors are so incredibly vital to hellbenders and to so many other aquatic species. It's really the what I think is the take-home message when it comes to hellbender conservation. And of course, one of the things that's going on in Ohio right now is Governor DeWine has announced his H2 Ohio Rivers, Big Rivers initiative. And so there is an emphasis on protecting rivers and streams in the state. And I'm really excited that we're going to be able to see a lot of great things come from that. So I want to point out that in 1989, I was only 14 years old when the Salamanders of Ohio came out. I didn't even know that the P was silent on Ralph Fingston. It was amazing to me that I would get to meet Ralph and then get to work with him. And unfortunately, Ralph passed away a couple of years ago. But before he did, we were able to work together as editors on 2 books that came out 2013 and 2021, The Amphibians and the Reptiles of Ohio. These are both available, by the way, from the Ohio Biological Survey. If you're interested, have not seen them together, it's 2,000 pages of information about Ohio's herps. Pretty massive tomes for the subject. And then finally, I wanted to end with talking about funding for wildlife, because this is incredibly important. Recovering America's Wildlife Act, if you're not familiar with this is something that has been worked on in one form or another for my entire career. It came very, very close to passing last year. It did not pass, but it did not get voted on. It passed the House, did not get voted on in the Senate, and it's once again, been introduced, and it's probably going to have some changes to it. But I just want to give you some idea as to what this could do for all the species that we do not hunt and fish for, which of course is the vast majority of species. Currently in the state of Ohio, nearly all the funding that the Division of Wildlife gets comes from hunting and fishing licenses and the excise taxes that are put on hunting and fishing gear, ammunition, motorboat fuel, that kind of thing. And the state wildlife grant money that funds all of the other wildlife, all the other non-game species like hellbenders, is pretty paltry in comparison. In Ohio, it's about 1.2 million. And like the state of Illinois, if RAWA was to pass, we would be looking at an increase of somewhere in the 20x range, high 20 million, low 30 million. So it would be a total game changer. And really what this is all about is getting us away from the emergency room, which is how the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, has really worked. It's really been the emergency room. And just like when you're treating people, the last thing you want to do is wait until somebody's in the emergency room to provide the care that they need. So with that, I want to thank again the Ohio Division of Wildlife, who has been supported all of this and supported my position and all that they've done. I really appreciate that. And that comes from the State Wildlife Grants Program administered from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Ohio Division of Wildlife. And those funds go to the Ohio Biodiversity Conservation Partnership, which is where I work at the Ohio State University. So I got plenty of time to answer questions, and I hope you have a bunch of them for me, Renee.
We do.
Okay.
There's some fabulous questions that I'll feed to you, but first off, I think you need to explain to everybody how you tag salamanders and how you know that you found a salamander that was part of your program when you're in the stream. That was a big question.
Yeah. I should have said that. Yeah. So we put microchips inside of them. So if you've had your dog microchipped, where they inject the little, it's like the size of a grain of rice, and you just inject it under the skin. It's completely unpowered. It's passive. They call them passive integrated transponders. Then when I wave a wand over them that has a power to it, it comes back with basically a barcode. So each animal has a unique identification. And so when we scan them, we get that number and we can look them up and say, oh, I know where you came from. So when we started doing the releases, we started using a different tag than we were using on the wild animals, because we wanted a smaller tag. And there's some very, very small, they call mini pit tags, mini passive integrated transponders, and they have a different code scheme to them. So when I scan an animal, I can immediately tell you if it's one that I tagged in the wild or if it's one that we released from one of our releases, because the numbers look very different. So that's a great question. And the pit tags, when I started this, pit tags cost about $12 a piece. Now they're down to about $1 a piece. So we put a lot of pit tags out there.
That's good. So you showed injured hellbenders. The question is, do they not regenerate after their injuries?
They do have some regenerative capabilities, and we find them with extra toes or toes that have grown and kind of splintered off and made all more, but there's a limit to what they can regenerate. So if they lose an entire limb, it'll heal up, but I've never seen them grow back an entire limb.
Okay.
But again, this is not just a hellbender thing. This is a herp thing in general. These animals are incredibly resilient, and there are animals out there that have one leg missing, and they've been living like this for my entire career, and they're doing just fine.
Okay. Okay. And okay, are they coated with something that helps keep them healthy? The person's asking because of the gloves the handlers were wearing in the videos as well. So is there a reason for that?
The gloves are more for us than it is for the
Okay.
hellbenders, especially
Okay.
if you're lifting rocks. We don't do a lot of
Okay.
rock lifting anymore because it does disturb the hellbender habitat. It's not great for them. It's necessary under some circumstances when we need to get our hands on animals, but most of what we do now is pretty hands off. We're snorkeling up on these rocks and just peering underneath them using the cameras. But they do have a slime coat on their body. Their entire body is very slimy, and they produce two different kind of mucus secretions when they get upset. One of them is very frothy. If you put them into a 5-gallon bucket, it looks like somebody shook up a can of beer and opened it up and just there's froth everywhere. The other one is very much like the sap of a milkweed, and you can actually roll it up into a ball. It's very sticky white. And if you were to do something like rub your eyes after touching them, you will see your face blow up and your eyes hurt and sting. It's kind of like getting maced. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you talked a lot and showed a lot of videos of males. So
Mhm.
people are curious if the males and females stay together to rear the young, and if not, where do the females go?
Yeah, so we don't have as much information on the females, and the females, when they go in to lay eggs, will oftentimes turn around and try to grab a bunch of eggs to eat on their way out too. So the male lets the female in, even encourages the female to come in and breed under that rock. But as soon as she's done, he kicks her out, and with as much force as anything, he chases her right out of there. And again, in healthy populations, you'll have multiple females go in, so she's trying to grab some other ones to eat on her way out. Um, we don't see the females as much because we aren't lifting the rocks as much. We're not tearing up the habitat as much, which is a good thing. But we don't see the females as much because of that. If on one of those magical days like September 7th, we do see females out just walking around, and we've actually found them where the eggs are actually starting to come out. They're actually trailing eggs behind them as they're going to lay eggs into a nest.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. So the question is, do you think there possibly could have ever been hellbenders in the Lake Erie drainage?
I don't think so.
Okay.
There's only a single stream that is not Mississippi drainage where there's hellbenders, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of that stream that flows into the Chesapeake. There are some skeletal remains that were found near the Potomac, that makes people think that they could have been in the Potomac. So it does open up the possibility for an Atlantic drainage hellbenders, but there's no evidence that there's ever hellbenders in any of the Great Lakes drainages.
Okay. Um, do they have teeth?
They do. They have
Okay.
bony ridges, and when they bite, I've only been bitten a couple of times, only once really good, and it is amazing. It's kind of like a vice grip. They have a really strong bite. Yep.
Okay. Are the adults affected when you remove the eggs at all?
They aren't, and I know this because we've collected eggs from males multiple times. We've gone back multiple years to some of these nests, and the same male is there. We've also left eggs behind so that we can go back and see, including that male that I showed you was one of our babies that we released 10 years, or that we collected as an egg 10 years ago. We left some of those eggs behind, and we went back and saw that he was still guarding them and that they were hatching in there. So that was even, just a cherry on top, right? That not only did
Yeah.
he grow up to reproduce, but he also was a good dad.
Yeah, no kidding. So in Ohio, which streams have the greatest population densities?
So we don't give out
Okay.
that information, but I'll just tell you that it's Eastern Ohio and it's forest, right? So, it's a lot of our great streams, that Flushing escarpment that runs along the eastern seaboard of Ohio, or the eastern side of Ohio. Those direct tributaries to the Ohio River have some of the greatest fish diversity. They have some of the best hellbender populations. They're often overlooked, I think, but I think they're starting to get more recognition. Many of you might know Brian Zimmerman, who does fish work in Ohio, and we talk all the time and about how a lot of these streams are, not just great for hellbenders, but also great for so many of our rare fish species too.
Yeah. Do you have any idea what the oldest hellbender was that's been observed?
So the oldest hellbender is in the offices of the Captina Conservancy right now.
Oh my
And
God.
I'll tell you this story. This is a fun story. So Ralph Fingston, as I said, he passed away a couple years ago. Ralph's the first hellbender that Ralph captured. He took home. It was a young animal, and this is the 1980s. They were not listed, and he took it home. And when Ralph had a stroke, I called his wife and said, "Let me know if there's anything I can do." And she called me a few days later and said, I guess I need to do something with this hellbender. So we took the hellbender, and the Columbus Zoo donated a big aquarium to the Captina Conservancy offices. And Marvin is the name of the hellbender, although Marvin is Marvin's a female, but that's all right. They kept the name. I believe that Marvin has his own social media. I saw a T-shirt the other day, Marvin Fan Club. Marvin has become, and so Marvin was captured as, I think we estimated him as a 7-year-old animal, and he was captured in 1985. So I'll let you do the math, but I think that puts him at puts him over 40, I think. Yeah, he has the record right now. But there's some evidence, there's some speculation that's, animals that from early studies in Missouri that have been observed. And back then they used to brand them. And there's some, I believe, that look like they still have markings, branding, so they would be older animals probably. But if you make it down, if you make it down to Barnesville, Ohio, be sure to stop in and visit Marvin. It's a great story. And I will also tell you that Ralph never got a permit for that animal. He thought he was grandfathered in, although there's no grandfathering in of endangered species, but
that's okay.
Now that
he can have a pass on that one.
That's right. Now that he's passed away, I can tell these stories. That's right.
Right. Hey, does anyone eat hellbenders? Tell us a little bit about the predator-prey relationships.
So otters eat hellbenders. We know that. That's probably the biggest well, I don't know, one of the biggest predators. When we release hellbenders, so the first time we released hellbenders, first 2 years, we put radio transmitters in all of them, and the number one predator was raccoons. And as most people probably know, raccoon numbers are much, much higher today than they ever used to be in Ohio. And what we noticed with hellbenders is when we first release them, they seem to do things they shouldn't do as a hellbender. They move around a lot, which is not uncommon for an animal that's been released from captivity into the wild. And it's only in those first few weeks that they seem to be very vulnerable to that. They pick bad rocks. They go near the shoreline. Once we had our predation rate went to pretty much zero after about 21 days, and the animals that made it through those 21 days picked nice big rocks out towards the center of the stream and didn't get eaten by anything. Mink will eat them also, and herons will also, but again, most of the time these guys are under great big rocks, so once they reach adulthood, there's very little that can predate them. I will tell you, I found an article, I want to say from the 1930s, about them being for sale in New York markets as a food for people. And in that article, it actually states that they were being collected from Ohio. So at one point there was actually a market for people to eat them. It was more of a novelty than anything, obviously.
Wow. Oh man. So this is a good question. I missed it when I was scrolling earlier. How many times a year does the female lay eggs, and at what age do the females begin laying eggs?
So they only lay eggs during one time of the year, that late August, early September. is when they lay eggs. She may visit more than one rock, more than one nest, and lay eggs. It appears, we're over 40 nests now that we've seen, and it appears that when we find eggs, they're almost always in the 250 to 300 groupings. So we might find 250 under a nest, under a rock, or we might find 500, or occasionally you might find 750. But if we do find 500 to 750, oftentimes you can tell that there's multiple groups in there. So multiple females have visited. So they're laying, each female is laying a complement of 250. But when you look at early studies where they cut a lot of these animals open and looked at them, a female wasn't uncommon for her to have 500 eggs in her. So if she had 500 eggs in her and we're getting 250, that tells me maybe she's visiting 2 rocks and laying 250 and 250.
That's great. And then this is the last question I'm going to pass along to you. If we didn't get to your question, we'll make sure we get to it later. But do you know anything about ancient, like from the ancient history, more like paleontology wise with hellbenders? Do you have any records of that?
So there are, wouldn't be ancient, but there are records of skeletal materials being found in fire pits of some Native Americans. And when I talk to archaeologists about that, they've often wondered if there wasn't some sort of medicinal or even, they do produce those toxins, right? Who knows what you could do with those toxins if you prepare them right. I don't know if there was they were using them in some sort of a ritual. It seems like a whole lot of work to go after hellbenders for food. But paleontologically, you can find skeletal material, fossilized skeletal material that looks like hellbenders. That's millions of years old. That's one of the things I love about these animals is they've been around through so much in the body form that they are today, virtually unchanged for millions of years.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Greg, I think you've enlightened us all. I certainly learned
I had
stuff,
fun.
loved your videos.
Good. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. And I love all the questions that I saw that people were interested in finding Marvin t-shirts, and I hope to God people can find some Marvin t-shirts. The first one I saw, I couldn't believe it that there was a Marvin fan club. And I'm so happy that Ralph's Hellbender is out there, doing great work for him. So
No kidding. And I'll do some research on that too. I always do a follow-up email after the program. So if I
great.
find out anything, I'll share it with everyone. And all the links that I placed in the chat tonight, I will put those in a follow-up email with the recording of tonight's session. And please log in and register for our Like-In Talk that's coming up the day before Valentine's Day, February 13th. And if you're in Northeast Ohio and want to come and re-examine and nurture your conservation land ethic, join us at the Land Conservancy's offices in Moreland Hills when we welcome Buddy Hofbaker to Northeast Ohio to talk about a Sand County Almanac. Hard to believe it's 75 years old. We're all getting old, Greg.
I know we are. It's a great book, though. It's timeless.
It really is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. I'm going to stick
Thank
around
you.
here for a little bit longer and let people fill the chat up.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye now.